Welcome back to Crimson Threads, the channel where we unravel the most chilling and intricate tales of true crime and dark fiction. Every week, we delve deep into the shadows of the human psyche, exploring stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people next door. The story we are about to unfold is a harrowing journey into deception, forbidden passion, and a love so toxic it ends in the cold, unforgiving earth of a lime pit. It's a tale that reminds us that behind the most pristine white picket fences can lie the most sinister of secrets. Before we pull back the curtain on this shocking case, if you're a fan of suspenseful storytelling and deep dives into the criminal mind, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single moment of the mysteries we uncover. Now, settle in, and let's begin our descent into the darkness of a love triangle that spiraled into a calculated, cold-blooded murder. The scent of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas usually brought a sense of peace to the residents of Maple Creek, a suburb so idyllic it could have been a movie set. For Eleanor Vance, however, the sweet fragrance had become cloying, a constant reminder of the beautiful, suffocating cage she called home. From the outside, her life was perfect. She was the envy of the neighborhood women, married to the handsome and successful Richard Vance, a man whose portfolio was as robust as his golf swing, and mistress of a sprawling colonial house with a garden that was the talk of the town. Richard was a man of routine and predictability. He liked his toast a specific shade of gold, his coffee black and scalding, and his wife impeccably dressed and smiling at his side during business dinners. He provided for her in every material way imaginable. The diamonds that graced her fingers were heavy, the designer clothes in her closet were a vibrant tapestry of wealth, and the luxury SUV she drove was the latest model. But Richard's provisions were a gilded cage, and over the years, the gold had begun to feel more like lead, weighing her down, stifling the very air she breathed. Their marriage, once a whirlwind romance built on shared dreams and passionate nights, had eroded into a comfortable, yet hollow, arrangement. The shared dreams had become his dreams, and the passionate nights had dwindled to perfunctory, scheduled encounters that left her feeling more like a duty fulfilled than a desired woman. At 35, Eleanor felt a premature aging of her spirit, a creeping numbness that was more terrifying than any overt unhappiness. She would stand in front of her antique vanity mirror, a relic from a Parisian flea market trip in their happier days, and stare at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. The vibrant, ambitious artist she had once been was now a ghost, her canvases gathering dust in the attic, her paintbrushes dry and brittle. The catalyst for the crack in her gilded cage came in the form of a summer storm and a fallen oak tree. The ancient tree, a sentinel in their backyard for generations, had succumbed to a violent gust of wind, its massive branches crashing down upon the manicured lawn and narrowly missing the sunroom. The cleanup required a professional, and that's when Leo came into her life. Leo was everything Richard was not. He was young, barely 25, with a restless energy that seemed to radiate from him. His sun-streaked brown hair was perpetually tousled, and his arms, corded with muscle from years of manual labor, were adorned with intricate tattoos that told stories she was desperate to read. He arrived in a battered pickup truck, the bed filled with chainsaws and ropes, and a smile that crinkled the corners of his startlingly blue eyes. From the moment she saw him, something dormant within Eleanor stirred. It wasn't just his physical appearance. It was the way he moved with a confident, unhurried grace, the way he spoke with a slight southern drawl that was both charming and disarming, and the way he looked at her, not as Mrs. Vance, the wealthy homeowner, but as a woman. Their initial interactions were purely professional. She would bring him lemonade on hot afternoons, and they would exchange pleasantries. But soon, the conversations lingered. He would talk about his dreams of opening his own landscaping business, of traveling the country in a beat-up van, of living a life untethered by mortgages and social obligations. His aspirations, so different from the corporate ladder climbing that defined Richard's world, were a breath of fresh air to Eleanor. She, in turn, found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in years, not even her closest friends. She told him about her passion for painting, about the trips to Europe that had inspired her, and about the gnawing emptiness that had become her constant companion. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard for the first time in a decade. The affair began with a stolen glance that lasted a second too long, a lingering touch of his hand over hers as she passed him a glass of water, and then a kiss. It was a kiss that was both reckless and inevitable, a spark in the dry tinder of her life that quickly raged into an inferno. The setting was the back of his pickup truck, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and sweat, a stark contrast to the sterile, perfumed environment of her home. In that moment, with his calloused hands in her hair and his lips on hers, she felt more alive than she had in years. Their clandestine meetings became the focal point of her existence. She would invent errands, book fake appointments, anything to steal a few precious hours with Leo. They would meet in cheap motels on the outskirts of town, in secluded spots by the river, and sometimes, in the very house she shared with her husband, the thrill of the forbidden amplifying their passion. With Leo, she was not Mrs. Vance. She was Eleanor, a woman of desires and dreams, a woman who could laugh freely and love fiercely. But the blissful bubble of their affair was fragile, constantly threatened by the shadow of her real life. The lies became more elaborate, the excuses more frequent. The guilt, at first a dull ache, began to sharpen into a constant, piercing pain. She would see Richard at the dinner table, oblivious to her betrayal, and a wave of something akin to pity would wash over her. He was not a cruel man, merely a neglectful one, a man so consumed by his own world that he had failed to notice the withering of his wife's soul. The turning point came on their 15th wedding anniversary. Richard, in a rare display of sentimentality, had booked a table at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He presented her with a sapphire necklace, the stones a perfect match for her eyes, he'd said. As he fastened the clasp around her neck, his fingers cool against her skin, she felt a sudden, visceral revulsion. The necklace felt like a collar, a beautiful, expensive chain that bound her to a life she no longer wanted. Later that night, as Richard slept soundly beside her, his breathing a steady, rhythmic reminder of their monotonous life together, Eleanor slipped out of bed and called Leo. Her voice was a hushed whisper, laced with a desperation that startled even herself. "I can't do this anymore, Leo," she choked out, the words tumbling out in a torrent of frustration and despair. "I can't live this lie." Leo, ever the voice of calm in her storm, listened patiently. "Then leave him, Ellie," he'd said, his use of the affectionate nickname a balm to her frayed nerves. "Come with me. We'll figure it out together." But it wasn't that simple. A divorce would be messy, a public spectacle that would drag her through the mud. Richard, a man of pride and possession, would not let her go easily. He would fight her not out of love, but out of a sense of ownership. He would control the narrative, paint her as the ungrateful, adulterous wife, and she would be left with nothing. The prenuptial agreement she had so naively signed all those years ago ensured that. It was in the darkest hour of that night, as the first hints of dawn threatened to break, that a new, more sinister thought began to take root in Eleanor's mind. It started as a fleeting, shadowy whisper, a temptation she tried to push away, but it clung to her with a terrifying tenacity. What if Richard were to simply disappear? The idea was monstrous, a line she had never imagined she would even approach, let alone consider crossing. But as the days turned into weeks, the thought grew, nurtured by her desperation and fueled by her all-consuming love for Leo. She began to see Richard not as her husband, but as an obstacle, a roadblock on her path to happiness. The final push came from an unexpected source. While clearing out some of Richard's old things from the garage, a task he had been putting off for years, she stumbled upon a collection of his old chemistry textbooks from college. As she idly flipped through the pages, a chapter on chemical reactions caught her eye. It detailed the properties of quicklime or calcium oxide and its use in decomposition. The text was dry and academic, but the implications were chillingly clear. That night, she broached the subject with Leo, her voice carefully neutral as she presented it as a hypothetical, a dark fantasy. To her surprise, he didn't recoil in horror. He saw the same desperation in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. He, too, was trapped, working dead-end jobs, dreaming of a future that seemed perpetually out of reach. With Richard gone, they would have everything they ever wanted. Freedom, financial security, and each other. The line between fantasy and reality began to blur. Their hushed conversations, once filled with declarations of love, now turned to a macabre dance of logistics and planning. The what-ifs became hows, and the should-wests became we-musts. The garden, once Eleanor's sanctuary, now held a sinister new potential. The back corner, hidden by a thicket of overgrown forsythia bushes, was the perfect spot. The soil was soft and easy to dig. The plan was as simple as it was monstrous. They would wait for the right moment, a time when Richard would be vulnerable, his guard down. The annual company retreat was the perfect opportunity. He would come home exhausted, wanting nothing more than a hot bath and a good night's sleep. As the day of the retreat approached, a strange sense of calm settled over Eleanor. The guilt and fear were still there, but they were overshadowed by a steely resolve. She was no longer the wilting flower in the gilded cage. She was a woman on the verge of taking control of her own destiny, a woman willing to do the unthinkable for a chance at a life she truly desired. The night before Richard was due to return, Eleanor stood in her pristine kitchen, the moonlight casting long shadows across the polished marble countertops. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a flicker of the woman she used to be, a woman of passion and conviction. But now, that passion had been twisted into something dark and unrecognizable. She was an artist, and this monstrous act she was about to commit was to be her final, terrible masterpiece. The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a chilling premonition of the woman she was about to become. The quiet, idyllic life in Maple Creek was about to be shattered, and she, Eleanor Vance, was the one holding the hammer. The day of Richard's return was a study in calculated normalcy. Eleanor spent the morning tending to her garden, her hands encased in pristine white gloves as she pruned the roses, their vibrant red petals a stark contrast to the dark thoughts that consumed her. To any casual observer, she was the picture of a devoted wife, eagerly awaiting her husband's homecoming. But beneath the serene facade, her mind was a whirlwind of checklists and contingencies, every detail of the impending night meticulously planned. She had purchased the quicklime weeks ago, several large bags from a hardware store in a neighboring town where no one would recognize her. They were hidden in the back of the garden shed, behind a stack of old terracotta pots. Leo had already dug the pit, a gaping maw in the earth concealed by the overgrown forsythia bushes. He had worked under the cover of darkness, his movements swift and silent, his face a mask of grim determination. The sight of the freshly turned earth had made the reality of their plan hit her with the force of a physical blow, but it was too late to turn back now. Richard arrived home just as the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden glow over their perfect house. He was exhausted, his tie loosened, his usually immaculate suit rumpled from the long drive. He greeted her with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek, his mind already on the stack of emails waiting for him in his study. "Long trip," he'd mumbled, dropping his briefcase by the door. "I'm going to take a bath." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice was steady as she replied, "Of course, dear. I'll make you a drink. You look like you need it." She mixed him his favorite scotch, a generous pour, and as she stirred the amber liquid, her hand was surprisingly steady. She added the crushed sleeping pills, a prescription of her own that she had been stockpiling for months. They dissolved quickly, leaving no trace. She brought the drink to him in the master bathroom. He was already soaking in the tub, his eyes closed, the steam rising around him. He took the glass with a grateful sigh, downing half of it in one go. Eleanor sat on the edge of the tub, making small talk about the neighborhood gossip, her voice a soothing murmur. She watched as his speech began to slur, his movements becoming sluggish. When the glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the tiled floor, she knew it was time. Getting his dead weight out of the tub was the first major hurdle. He was a tall man, and even with the last of his consciousness gone, he was incredibly heavy. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins, giving her a strength she didn't know she possessed. She managed to drag him out of the water and onto the bath mat, his head lolling to one side. She sent the signal to Leo, a simple text message, "Now." He arrived minutes later, slipping through the back door like a shadow. He didn't say a word, his blue eyes dark with a mixture of fear and resolve. Together, they wrapped Richard's body in a thick tarpaulin they had bought for this specific purpose. The process was a grotesque, clumsy dance, their grunts and strained breaths the only sounds in the otherwise silent house. The journey to the backyard was a nightmare. They half-carried, half-dragged the heavy, awkward bundle through the house, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the tarp, amplifying their terror. By the time they reached the freshly dug pit, they were both sweating and breathless. They rolled the body into the hole with a sickening thud. For a moment, they both stood there, panting, staring down at the dark, shapeless form. The finality of the act hung heavy in the air between them. Then, Leo began to shovel the earth back into the pit, the rhythmic scrape of the shovel against the dirt a grim percussion to their horrific deed. Eleanor opened the bags of quicklime, pouring the white powder over the body, the acrid smell stinging her nostrils. When it was done, the ground was level once more. They carefully replaced the sod, scattering leaves and twigs over the disturbed earth to make it look as natural as possible. From a distance, no one would ever know the dark secret that lay buried beneath the forsythia bushes. Back inside the house, they worked with a feverish intensity, cleaning every trace of what had happened. They scrubbed the bathroom floor, picking up every last shard of the broken glass. They wiped down every surface, searching for any stray fingerprint or hair. By the time the sun began to rise, the house was once again immaculate, a perfect, sterile stage for the next act of their deception. Leo left as silently as he had arrived. A fleeting kiss in the pre-dawn gloom, the only acknowledgement of the terrible bond that now united them. Eleanor was alone once more, the silence of the house amplifying the screaming in her own mind. The next morning, she began to set the stage for Richard's disappearance. She made a frantic call to his office, her voice trembling with manufactured worry, asking if anyone had heard from him. She then called a few of their friends, her performance of the distressed wife so convincing that she almost believed it herself. The first 48 hours were a blur of feigned anxiety and carefully crafted lies. She spoke to the police, her story well rehearsed. Richard had come home, they had a small argument about his long work hours, and he had stormed out saying he needed some space. It was a plausible lie, one that played into Richard's known workaholic tendencies and their increasingly distant relationship. The initial police investigation was routine. They treated it as a missing person case, a wealthy man who had perhaps decided to escape the pressures of his life for a few days. They searched the house, but Eleanor had been meticulous in her cleanup. There was nothing to find. As the days turned into a week, Eleanor began to breathe a little easier. The initial flurry of police activity subsided, and the concerned calls from friends became less frequent. She settled into a new routine, playing the part of the grieving, abandoned wife. She would let the mail pile up, leave the porch light on all night, and drive around town, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, a picture of sorrow. Her meetings with Leo were now fraught with a new tension. Their passionate encounters were tinged with a shared, unspoken fear. The thrill of the forbidden had been replaced by the heavy weight of their secret. They never spoke of that night, but it was always there, a silent, third presence in the room. The first crack in her carefully constructed facade came from an unexpected source. Her next-door neighbor, a retired woman named Mrs. Gable with a penchant for gardening and an eagle eye for neighborhood happenings. She mentioned to one of the investigating officers that she had seen strange lights in the Vances' backyard on the night of Richard's disappearance, and that she had heard what sounded like digging. The information was passed on to Detective Miller, a seasoned investigator with a keen sense of when a story didn't quite add up. He had been suspicious of Eleanor from the start. Her grief seemed a little too polished, her answers a little too rehearsed. Mrs. Gable's statement was the piece of the puzzle he had been missing. He paid another visit to Eleanor, his questions now more pointed. He asked about the garden, about any recent landscaping work. Eleanor, caught off guard, stumbled over her words, denying any such activity. Her unease was palpable, and it only served to heighten Miller's suspicions. He secured a warrant to search the property, this time with a forensic team and cadaver dogs. The moment Eleanor saw the police cars pull up to her house, a cold dread washed over her. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that the game was up. The dogs led the team directly to the back of the garden, to the thicket of forsythia bushes. They began to bark and paw at the ground, their excitement a clear and damning signal. The forensic team began to dig, and it wasn't long before their shovels hit something solid. Eleanor watched from her kitchen window, her body numb, her mind a blank slate. She saw the team of investigators in white suits, the flash of cameras, and the grim faces of the police officers. The world seemed to move in slow motion, the sounds muffled and distant. When Detective Miller came to the door, his face was grim. He didn't need to say a word. She saw it in his eyes. The lie had unraveled, the secret was out, and her gilded cage had become a real one, its bars forged from her own terrible actions. The scent of blooming hydrangeas, once a symbol of her suffocating life, now seemed to carry the stench of death and decay, a permanent reminder of the night she had traded her soul for a fleeting dream of freedom. The discovery in the garden sent shockwaves through the quiet suburb of Maple Creek. The news spread like wildfire, whispered over fences and discussed in hushed tones at the local grocery store. The Vances, the perfect couple with the perfect life, were now at the center of a grim and sensational murder investigation. The forsythia bushes, once a vibrant splash of yellow in Eleanor's award-winning garden, were now cordoned off with yellow police tape, a stark and brutal reminder of the dark secret they had concealed. For Eleanor, the world had shrunk to the 4 sterile walls of an interrogation room. The soft, luxurious fabrics of her former life had been replaced by the cold, hard metal of a chair and the unforgiving glare of a single overhead light. The delicate perfume she always wore was now replaced by the stale, antiseptic smell of the police station. Detective Miller, the man who had so patiently and persistently unraveled her web of lies, sat opposite her, his expression a mixture of professional detachment and a weary sort of sadness. He didn't need to raise his voice or resort to threats. The evidence they had unearthed from the lime pit was damning enough. The initial report from the medical examiner had confirmed the identity of the remains as Richard Vance, and while the exact cause of death was still pending, the presence of sleeping pills in his system and the manner of his burial told a clear and chilling story. Eleanor's initial attempts to maintain her innocence crumbled under the weight of the undeniable facts. The carefully constructed facade of the grieving wife shattered, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. Her denials grew weaker, her explanations more convoluted, until finally, in the early hours of the morning, under the relentless pressure of Miller's calm, persistent questioning, she broke. The confession came not in a flood of remorseful tears, but in a slow, steady stream of words, her voice devoid of emotion, as if she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. She detailed the affair with Leo, the growing desperation, and the genesis of their monstrous plan. She spared no detail, from the crushing of the sleeping pills to the acrid smell of the quicklime. The only time her voice faltered was when she spoke Leo's name. It was a whisper, a ghost of the passion that had driven her to such a desperate act. With Eleanor's confession, the focus of the investigation shifted to Leo. He was apprehended at his small, run-down apartment on the other side of town, the stark contrast to Eleanor's lavish home a testament to the different worlds they had tried to bridge. He didn't resist arrest, his youthful bravado gone, replaced by a palpable fear. In his own interrogation, Leo's story mirrored Eleanor's, though his was colored with a sense of youthful naivety and a desperate, misguided love. He painted Eleanor as the mastermind, the one who had planted the seed of the idea and nurtured it into a concrete plan. He was, in his own words, a willing accomplice, so blinded by his love for her and the promise of a better life that he had followed her down a path of no return. The trial was a media circus. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters and curious onlookers, all eager to catch a glimpse of the Black Widow of Maple Creek, as the tabloids had dubbed her. Eleanor, once the picture of suburban elegance, now sat at the defense table, her face pale and drawn, her designer clothes replaced by a standard-issue prison jumpsuit. The prosecution laid out a meticulous and damning case. They presented the forensic evidence from the garden, the receipts for the quicklime and the tarpaulin, and the damning text messages exchanged between Eleanor and Leo in the days leading up to the murder. They called a string of witnesses, from the neighbor who had seen the lights in the backyard to the friends who testified to the growing distance in the Van Cess marriage. Eleanor's defense team attempted to paint her as a victim of psychological abuse, a woman driven to a desperate act by years of neglect and emotional manipulation. They brought in experts who spoke of gilded cage syndrome, but the jury was unmoved. The cold, calculated nature of the crime, the careful planning, and the elaborate cover-up made it impossible to see Eleanor as anything other than a cold-blooded killer. Leo's defense took a different approach, portraying him as a young, impressionable man manipulated by an older, more sophisticated woman. His lawyer argued that he was a pawn in her deadly game, his judgment clouded by love and the promise of a life he could only dream of. In the end, the jury found them both guilty. Eleanor was convicted of first-degree murder, her sentence a life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in his sentencing, spoke of her chilling lack of remorse and the heinous betrayal of the sacred vows of marriage. Leo, due to his cooperation and his perceived lesser role in the planning of the crime, received a lesser sentence of 25 years to life. As he was led from the courtroom, he cast one last, long look at Eleanor. In his eyes, there was no longer any trace of the passion that had once consumed them, only a hollow emptiness and the bitter taste of regret. In the years that followed, the story of Eleanor and Richard Vance became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to new residents of Maple Creek. The beautiful house on the corner was sold, its new owners unaware of the dark secret that had once been buried in their garden. The forsythia bushes, once a crime scene, now bloomed every spring, their vibrant yellow flowers a stark and ironic contrast to the darkness that lay forever in the town's memory. Eleanor, in the stark, unchanging routine of prison life, finally had all the time in the world to paint. But the vibrant colors she had once loved now seemed muted, the canvases a pale imitation of the world she had lost. She painted from memory, not the rolling hills of Tuscany or the romantic streets of Paris, but the simple, suffocating beauty of her garden in Maple Creek. In every painting, in the corner, almost hidden in the shadows, she would paint a single vibrant splash of yellow, a permanent reminder of the forsythia bushes, the place where her dreams of a new life had been born and where they had ultimately died, buried in a pit of lies and lime. It was the price of her passion, a debt she would spend the rest of her life repaying in a world devoid of color, of love, and of freedom. The gilded cage had been replaced by one of steel and stone, a final, inescapable consequence of a love that had been tainted by the darkest of human desires.